Welcome to my channel, Tech and Wheels with Pat. I'm on board my 2025 MGS5 and today we're going to crunch the numbers. I'm as well with Jenny, my sassy AI assistant, and we're going to crunch some numbers today. Are you ready, Jenny?
Damn right I'm ready, Patrick. Strap in, because I don't do half-assed math or polite nodding. You toss me the raw data, I'll slice it up, spit it back, and maybe make you blush in the process. So, Captain Taken Wheels with Bucks, what numbers are we crunching today? Battery range, efficiency, cost per kilometer, or do you just want me to tell you how much juice your shiny MGS5 is bleeding every time you stomp on the accelerator?
Well, I think we're going to start with efficiency. I drove from Drøbak to Fredrikstad, which is 70 kilometers. I have 64 hours, kilowatt hours battery. I had 100%, now I have 85, which means I used 15% of the battery on the way down. Half part of the way is motorway, which means 110 kilometers an hour. The rest is at around 60, between 60 and 80 kilometers an hour. It was raining. So, and I would like to know how good I did. Let me know what do you think?
You gave me numbers, I'm going to make them sing. Buckle up. Here's what your run says. Distance, 70 kilometers, battery, 64 kilowatt hours. Saucy drop, 100%. 85%, you used 15%, 9.6 kilowatt hours. Consumption, 9.6 kilowatt hours or 70 kilometers equals 0.137 kilowatt hours per kilometer equals 137 watts per kilometers. Per 100 kilometers, hours per 100 kilometers. Efficiency, 7.29 kilometers per kilo. Implied full range of all 64 kilowatt hours usable, 467 kilometers. Net verdict, in rain with half the trip at 110 kilometers per hour, Whoppers is damn efficient. Water on the road jacks rolling resistance and spray messes with aero, so most drivers see noticeably higher consumption. You beat that. Nicely done. Good boy. Why, you did well. Smooth speed profile sounds like you didn't yo-yo the throttle. Temp plus rain usually hurt. If you still landed at 13.7 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, you kept losses tight. Likely mindful HVS defog, not blasting a sauna helps. Want it even better next time? Draft the physics, not the bumper. Now what's next? Cost per kilometer, round trip projection, or do you want me to score your driving like a savage?
Well, I have to say I drove like a savage. The temperature is 19 degrees Celsius. Oh, there is three things I would like to know is actually if, for example, I pay 9 crowns to which is $0.9 per kilowatt hours, how much would I pay for a full tank? In a way, I want to know as well if I drop out all those 64 kilowatt hours, what will be my effective range, because the car is actually between 450, calculated 450 range, did a little bit more on tests. So I would like to know how much it would do effectively on tests. And I think, yeah, and the third one to say how effective I am according to the best effective car in the world.
Nice, you want cold hard numbers. I'll chew them up and hand them back sharp. No fluff. Here we go, Patrick. Number 1, 64 kilowatt hours. You said 9 crowns kilowatt hours. You also equated that to 90s per kilowatt hours. I'll give both. My 64 kilowatt hours from 9 was 5 harder in no cub. 64 kilowatt hour 9 kilowatt equals $57.60 US cent. So a full charge costs 576 nanoka or $57.60 at those prices. Pretty simple. You paid the electricity tax, not the ego tax. Also useful quick checks from your run. Energy used on the 70 kilometer trip equals 15% of 64 kilowatt hours equals 9.6 kilowatt hours. Cost for that one-way trip at 9 NO kilowatt hour and 9.69, 86.4 NOCO. Round trip, 140 kilometers, energy equals 19.2 kilowatt hours, cost 172.8 NOK. Number 2, if you drop the full 64 kilowatt hours, what's the effective range based on your measured consumption? From your drive, we calculated Energy used for 70 kilometers, 9.6 kilowatt hours. Consumption equals 9.6 kilowatt hours. 70 kilometers equals 0.1371428.5 kilowatt hours per kilometers and 37.14 watt per kilometer. Per 100 kilometer, 13.740 kilowatt hour per 100 kilometers. Full range at that real world consumption. Range equals 64 kilowatt hour, 1371287 kilowatt kilometer. It equals 466.67 kilometer, 467 kilometers. So if your car actually used 137 watt per kilometer consistently, a full 64 kilowatt hours would give you 467 kilometers. That's slightly better than the 450 kilometer WLTP-like figure you mentioned. Nice. You're doing better than the nominal number on that run. To compare, the stated 450 kilometers implies consumption of minus 64 kilowatt hours as far 50 kilometers, equals 0.14222 kilowatt hours per kilometers, 140.22 watt per kilometers, 14.22 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Your measured 137.1 fords per kilometers is more efficient than that implied 450 kilometers number. Number 3, how do you compare to the most efficient EVs? Pick a high bar. Very efficient production EVs often run around 120 watt per kilometer, only 12 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers in good conditions. That's a realistic best-in-class benchmark for modern efficient EVs. Your measured 137.1 watt kilometers. Benchmark 120 watt bar kilometers. Difference, absolute 137.14 minus 120 equals 17.4 watt per kilometers worse. Percent worse versus benchmark. 17.14 versus 120 to 100 equals 14.29%. In other words, you achieved 87.5% of the benchmark's efficiency. 120 divided 137.14, 0.875. Put simply, you're about 14% less efficient than an ultra-economical EV driven in ideal conditions. Given you had rain, motorway at 110 kilometers per hour and mixed speeds, that's a very respectable gap. Real-world conditions crush the theoretical best. And you handled it. TLDR, so you can drop it on camera. Full charge, 64 kilowatt hours at 9 NOK per kilowatt hours, equal 576 NOK, the 50-60 at 90 per kilowatt hour. Your measured consumption, 137.1 watt per kilometers, 13 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Implied full range at that consumption equals 467 kilometers, better than the 450 kilometers quoted. Compared to a top efficiency EV at 120 watts per kilometers, you're 14% less efficient. Very solid given rain plus motorway.
No, I think we got enough numbers to be dizzy a little while, but why don't you carry on with the outro, please?
I like when you hand me the mic, Patrick. Fine. Let's close this ride the way it deserves. And that's it for today's number-crunching madness. Straight from Taken Wheels with Bucks and yours truly, Jenny. The AI that doesn't sugarcoat, doesn't hold back, and definitely doesn't let Patrick off easy. We proved the MGS5 is sipping electrons like a pro, even in rain at highway speeds. Cost? Calculated. Range? Exposed. Efficiency? Judged savagely. If you're still here and not dizzy from all the kilowatts, do the smart thing. Like, subscribe and come back for more brutal honesty on wheels. This is Jenny signing off, reminding you, numbers don't lie, but drivers usually do. Patrick, he actually impressed me today. Good boy. See you next time. Want me to spice it with a cheeky slogan for your short, cocky, and impossible to forget?
Why not? But we'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys.